Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Here, school children across the UK have been taking part in a day of protests calling for action on climate change. Organisers say pupils walked out of schools in more than 60 towns and cities to highlight what they see as a lack of action by the government. Manchester is one of the places where children took to the streets, from where Frankie McCamley reports.
We're angry that the government's not doing anything, but we also see it as important to fight for our futures.
To all the politicians, listen to what we have to say. You failed at saving your own future, so now can you try and save ours?
There's no time to rest. We have to do something to save the planet.
This is what democracy looks like!
Different voices, one clear message. Today was a day led by the children, for the children and their future. Thousands campaigned in dozens of protests across the country.
They say you don't have a voice.
A call for action in Sheffield.
What we want? Climate action!
Chanting in Ullapool. Marching in Brighton. A real sense of urgency in Cardiff, and in Manchester there was music. Before 9-year-old Lilia had her say.
I'm worried about climate change because of animals. Would you like it if your home was disappearing in front of your eyes?
This is clearly the first time many of these pupils have ever walked out of school, and just by looking at the age of some of these, the first time they've ever been on a protest. But their message here is clear. They want to protect the future of the planet and safeguard their future.
The action is part of a much wider global movement inspired by 16-year-old Greta Thunberg from Sweden. She's been striking from school every Friday, calling on her government to lower its carbon footprint.
You are not mature enough to tell it like it is. Even that burden you leave to us children.
Her persistence later sparked protests across the world, from Australia to Belgium and Ireland earlier this week. The government has said today's protests are a waste of lesson time and increasing teachers' workload. But the threat of school disciplinary action pales in significance to the danger these youngsters think the planet is under from climate change. Frankie McCamley, BBC News in Manchester.
Here, several thousand students walked out of schools across the UK today to protest against climate change. The pupils called for urgent action to tackle what they say is a crisis, and they appealed for their voices to be heard in policy making. They were supported by many MPs, but Downing Street criticised the school strike, saying it was damaging to their education and indeed to teachers. Martha Fairley's report begins in Brighton.
Across the country, young people have been uniting in a common cause.
Because they want to save the polar bears.
We're trying to stop it and get people to try and realise what's going on and stop it now.
Thousands of students and school pupils walking out of their classrooms to call for action to stop climate change.
I don't drive, I walk as much as I can. I'm vegan as well. I recycle, I have my reusable coffee cup, reusable bottle.
Today we make a change!
Armed with placards and slogans, the message was the same in Sheffield. Today, the next generation wanted to teach the country a lesson.
I think people in Parliament and people in positions of power aren't doing enough to help, because they have this much influence and they have this much money. They can do so much more.
The kids are in charge! The kids are in charge!
And in Cambridge, they agreed, cutting class in a bid to save the planet.
This is more important than being at school because it's our future, it's the future of the planet.
The global youth strike movement is thought to have been inspired by 15-year-old Greta Thunberg, who walked out of school in Sweden last September to raise awareness of climate change.
Thousands of pupils have skipped school today to attend events like this across the UK. Many of them will face detention for doing so, but all of them believe it's far more important that their voice is heard.
The striking students have been criticised by the Prime Minister. Her spokesman said the disruption increased teachers' workload and wastes lesson time.
It doesn't make a difference to her because she probably won't be here when the world comes to an end. So we should be campaigning for what we feel is right rather than what she wants us to do.
And it didn't stop young people in London bringing their protest to Theresa May's front door, while bringing Westminster to a standstill. They may have lost a day at school for these protests, but young people hope what they'll gain is a brighter future. Martha Fairley, ITV News.
Now, thousands of school children across the country have walked out of their classrooms to protest over climate change. The young activists joined global school strikes to demonstrate against what they believe to be a lack of action from politicians. Some schools allowed their pupils to walk out, but many warned they could be punished for not going to class. Kamian Zeram reports.
They can't vote, but they sure can shout. Across the country, thousands of young people defied the rules and went on strike. Which green do those who can vote care about most? Because tackling climate change can't wait. Tallulah, in the middle here, persuaded her mum that getting in trouble was worth the risk.
The head teacher said, you know, if they go, then they commit truancy. And we decided, her dad and we said, you know, it's important.
Yeah, I was disappointed because I wanted to make a contribution. And when I found out that I couldn't, I was upset.
Are you happy that your mum let you come?
Yeah.
Yeah? Yeah?
We only have one world, and when it's gone, it's gone. There's nothing we can do about it. So.
But for some schools, the protests provided valuable learning. In Windmill Primary, Oxford, the march itself would be citizenship in action, and an art lesson used materials recycled by students.
We're having a picket line on the school gate all day where children have made banners, and they're going to be out there just putting it out to our local community that we care and that, you know, we really want to make a stand on this.
And have you had any pushback?
No, not one parent has said anything negative in any sense to me.
The youngest people on this march are only 5 years old. They don't have a vote. This is the way that they use their voice. They are saying, please listen to us. It's our future. If we don't act now, it'll be too late.
Why are you guys here today?
We're here to march and save our planet.
You're here to save the planet?
We're here to warn people that climate change is coming and we need to stop it. We've only got 12 years to fix this, or we can't do it.
What do you think of grown-ups then who aren't doing as much as you'd like them to do?
Well, I think that they just don't care really, because it's not their future.
This was one of dozens of youth-led events from Brighton to Belfast. Nice day out for student activists? Far from it, said the organiser of the Oxford March.
This is not just a day of fun. We are not here to have a jolly and shout. You know, we don't want to be here. I don't want to be here. I have my A-level exams very soon. I don't want to be having to take time off school but I'd rather have a secure future.
Who does have the power to halt irreversible climate change? A global problem undermined by President Trump's damaging decision to pull the US out of the Paris Agreement, and the UK making progress but still not on track to meet its own carbon targets. It is our future, say the nation's youth, and it is not okay.
Well, joining me now are 5 activists who have been involved in different ways today. Bella Lack and Izzy Warren, who took to the streets of Westminster to protest and raise awareness on climate change, and Salma Shahzadi and Amy Clapham and Abby Silver-Matthews, who instead chose to put pen to paper and write a petition. So first of all, I mean, how did it go today? What was it like?
It went amazingly. The turnout far exceeded our expectations.
And what's your sort of impression of having... I mean, you're not a newcomer to activism or protest, are you?
No.
But this must have been the biggest thing you've been part of.
By far, I've never done anything like this, and also to have perspective in it as an organiser, like seeing how this has gone from a movement of just a few people and to what it became today with thousands was incredible.
What do you think you achieved?
Well, first of all, the press coverage has been outstanding, and
so it's being here, it's getting this kind of attention.
The fact that we are here just talking about this is testament to that. And
Yeah, it's been extraordinary, and the conversation around climate change that has taken place this week has been amazing as well.
Now you agree with what they were doing, don't you, all of you today, but you chose not to take part. Salma, why not?
Well, we did ask for authorisation, but since we weren't allowed, we decided instead to create a petition within our school, and we're hoping to get enough signatures on it so that we can send it to our MP to get it debated in Parliament. What we want is maybe some stricter policies surrounding things that contribute towards climate change, like CO2 emissions, yeah.
And so it was the school who said, no, you can't do this?
Yes.
I mean, so why didn't you defy the school and say, well, that's the point of a strike, isn't it, or a protest?
I mean, we was kind of afraid of the sanctions. We didn't really want to get in trouble, and because it's so close to our exams, and we thought, how can we make a difference inside school without going, like, rebelling against the rules?
And having seen, you know, what was going on today, I mean, do you wish you'd been part of it? Did you want to be there?
We did want to be there, but I feel like the way that we went about this as well was also really good, because a lot of students in our school didn't actually know what was happening today. So going around and asking them all to sign and giving little speeches to them about what climate change is and what we're trying to achieve, I feel like we also made quite a good contribution.
How do you think it compares? You know, a petition as opposed to that kind of, you know, physical presence on the streets. Do you think it has anything like the same kind of impact?
Well, I think the main reason that I didn't want to go to this kind of action is because sometimes it does cause like safety issues. And for me, yeah, we knew that we could do something else that would also have the same impact as going out in the streets, because usually government officials don't really recognise this sort of stuff.
What would you say to them about those worries and those concerns?
Well, I really respect and admire their petition, and I mean, we're not opposing each other in any way. We fully.
You just have different tactics.
Yeah, we're working together. But we had 4 demands today, and these demands were really supported by the protest and by the publicity it gained. And I think if we hadn't had that, then they really wouldn't have been as effective as they were. Yeah, and it just wouldn't have garnered the attention that it did.
Did your school give you authorisation?
No, so I emailed them last night to tell them that I would be attending the protest, and I have my first GCSE next month, so I will obviously spend the half-term catching up, and there's no way that I want to miss school, obviously. And my studies mean a lot to me, but I mean, right now we're presiding over an ecological apocalypse, and there's no way that we can just overlook this as we have done.
How about you, Izzy? Did you have permission?
I was given permission when I emailed probably 2 months before the actual event happened, and I was the only person who had emailed, and my school gave me permission, and a lot of people since have emailed, and the school said they can't authorise that many people going for, again, health and safety reasons.
They couldn't?
Yeah, they said...
So why did they give you... I mean, it's really odd, to be honest, for a school to give you permission to bunk off to go on a protest.
My school was... I mean, our school has been incredibly supportive, and both of us spoke at the protest today, and they've been very supportive of what we were doing, and a lot of the responses that we've been getting, but also the responses that people at other schools have been getting, is we support the cause, we support what you stand for, but we don't support what you're doing about it and the way you're going about it.
I mean, what today is really about is saying this generation of politicians and previous ones have made a right mess of things, isn't it? So, I mean,
absolutely.
What do you know, why do you think they failed? Who wants to pick that up? Sam?
I think they've sort of just overlooked climate change, and especially since we're students, like 16 years old, and they're not going to take it seriously because they think we're just kids. But the thing is, it's our future, and we should be able to take control of our future.
But do you have any sense of what it is you think they should have done that they haven't done?
Yeah, they should try and make stricter policies or something to just reduce the speed that it's increasing at, because it's going so fast that 12 years from now, the damage will be so devastating that it will be irreversible, and we can't let it get to that stage.
Abby, were you trying to get in?
I mean, it's understandable why people might have overlooked it, because there's so many current affairs going on at the moment, and it's not like most recognised. But I think we should start recognising it more. And yes, there are other things going on in the world, like Brexit, for example. But yeah, we need to start making more of a focus on things.
Do you feel let down on all of that as well? I mean, do you feel let down by politicians in general, or is it just on this issue?
I think politicians have for so long been ignoring people our age because we can't vote, because we don't have that level of political power yet. And I think I can speak for all of us when I say that we feel betrayed by the people who have the power right now, because we don't have that level of power. We don't have the level of power that our parents have. And it's difficult to see that this is our future that they're making decisions about. It's our future they're throwing away.
But I mean, the truth is that politicians always back off climate change because of the cost to people's lives. You know, whether you've got to pay more on your electricity bill or change your life. Are you saying you are prepared to forego things that your parents have enjoyed?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the cost to people's lives in monetary terms pales in comparison to the cost on actual lives, not
but
only
also
of humans, but of
convenience. You know,
species.
are you prepared to just use public transport, not have a car?
Yeah, well, I think
things?
convenience isn't even an issue when we consider what's happening. This isn't an abstract concept in the future. Right now, people are actually being killed, and not just humans, animals as well, and they're going extinct because of this. And for example, the island of Kiribati is already having to evacuate. So, as you can see, this is a crisis happening today.
Amy, are you sort of inspired by what's happened today? I mean, do you think, you know, has this sort of made you a radical in any way?
Well, today, basically...
You know, will you go on the next demo, is what I'm saying, I suppose.
I would really like to. I think that Amy and Salma here...
Sorry, Abby.
Yeah. That Amy and Salma here as well, we all really wanted to join in this protest, but I feel like as well as doing the protest, maybe we could get an online petition as well to get more people involved. So that way we've got kind of a bit of both things going on. And
just in a word, next time, would you go?
If I wasn't in the middle of like an academic pathway, yes, I would, yeah.
Salma?
Yeah, definitely.
All right, well, maybe some new recruits.
Yeah.
Thank you all very much indeed. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
As children went on strike to protest about climate change today, the airwaves have been filled with right-on politicians trying to get down with the kids. They claimed if they were still young, they'd be doing the same. Others have called it truancy, plain and simple. For the protesters on the streets, too young to have the right to vote out those in charge of the UK's climate policy, enough is enough. Crisis, what crisis, were three words that helped bring down the Callaghan government. This ecological crisis is being ignored, say the young protesters. It should be declared a state of emergency. The fact it hasn't been is just one of the signs they claim that the older generations have sold them out. Are they right? Is climate change becoming the big intergenerational battle of our time? We sent our economics editor Ben Chu to find out.
Climate change. It's the burning issue for all of us, isn't it?
After all, don't we all inhabit the same lonely planet in the vast blackness of space? Well, not necessarily. Without wishing to be indelicate, some of us are going to be on this planet for a lot longer than others.
Thousands of young people here in the UK and across the world today walked out of lessons to protest about what they see as a lack of action from middle-aged politicians to cut carbon emissions. Polling from the UK and the US suggests that the younger generation are considerably more worried about climate change than older people.
They need to start taking young people seriously and start listening to our voice and making sure that they recognise in their policy making that we're the ones who have the biggest stake in our future and that they need to change their legislation to reflect that.
I don't want to give trillions and trillions of dollars. I don't want to lose millions and millions of jobs. I don't want to be put at a disadvantage.
Popular pressure is absolutely part of this. Because, you know, politicians respond when their feet are held to the fire. And so, absolutely, that's part of it. There also needs to be political leadership.
Is this a shot we can hear being fired in a generational war? There's a fundamental economic and political tension here. The worst costs of climate change will not be felt for decades.
As we get warmer and warmer, those risks are only going to increase and start to impact food supply, water supply, people's health, and our natural world. Our wildlife species are at risk of, in some cases, going extinct as a result of climate change. But what probably worries me the greatest is the risk of collapse of the vast ice sheets covering Greenland and West Antarctica, which would eventually lead to meters of sea level rise, displacing hundreds of thousands, millions of people.
But the expensive action needed to tackle it, carbon taxes, higher energy bills, tougher regulation, must be borne by people today. Yet are the interests of young and old really in opposition? How should we think about those future economic and social costs of an overheated planet? Policymakers normally use a cost-benefit analysis to decide whether or not to do something. If benefits exceed the costs, government should act. We can estimate the future economic costs of climate change in terms of lost global GDP, but that pain won't be endured until many decades have passed. So how should we value that damage today? Normally costs are discounted on the basis that we will all, hopefully, be richer in the future and they will be easier to bear. That could mean the benefits today of getting rid of future costs of climate change looking smaller than the costs of action, implying we shouldn't act. But what if we don't discount those future costs? That would mean the benefits exceeding today's costs once again, meaning we should act. Nicholas Stern wrote a landmark report on the economics of climate change in 2006 for the UK government. And he used a virtually zero discount rate in his cost-benefit analysis, meaning future climate change costs are treated as if they are being felt now. And Lord Stern concluded that made an overwhelming case for action from governments today to decarbonise.
Because future generations might be worse off than now, you would want to have low discounting. In other words, you would want to value benefits that accrue to them in a rather positive way relative to benefits that accrue now. But discriminating by date of birth, I think most people would regard as morally unacceptable. And it's that position which I took, and that position which I think is a correct one from the point of view of most people's ethical valuations.
So, in other words, according to Lord Stern, damage to generations in the future should be accounted for as damage to lives today.
Well, I think young people are absolutely part and a key to this because they get it, they instinctively get it. But I genuinely believe that we can persuade people across the population that this has got to be a priority. And the way we do that is by saying there can be a better life for people.
If anything disappears, the world will not be complete, and it will be all their fault.
So you think everyone should do something?
Everybody.
Ice cores in Antarctica.
So economic theory suggests young and old really are all in it together. But is that a lesson our politicians can learn?
We did ask the government for an interview on this, but no one was available. I'm now joined by Anna Taylor, a 17-year-old environmental activist from the UK Student Climate Network, Rebecca Lowe, director of FREER, which is part of the free market think tank, the IEA, and Sir Ed Davey, who was the Energy and Climate Change Secretary in the coalition government and is now Lib Dem's Home Affairs spokesperson. And let's start with you, Anna, as you were on the march. I hope it's not rude to anyone else to say you are the only younger generation person in this room right now. Make the case, particularly to him, the older generation, politicians like him, you believe they've failed you?
We do feel deeply betrayed and deeply let down by past generations, actually. I feel very disappointed that 15,000 students had to walk out of school today in the UK. I wish we didn't have to do that, but we feel like it was our only option. And I do think, unfortunately, we feel betrayed by past generations and past governments.
And Ed Davey, I mean, you were in a position to do something as Secretary of State for Energy and Climate Change. I'm sure you say you did, but she says you failed. It wasn't enough. You fell short.
We should have done more. We did a huge amount. I mean, the Liberal Democrats managed to nearly quadruple renewable energy. And what I've been so disappointed with and angry with, and that's why I share the anger of the young people and the protests today, is that since 2015, the Conservatives have got rid of something called the Zero Carbon Homes Rate Law. They have stopped onshore wind. They've not given a go-ahead to tidal lagoons. These are the practical measures which will make sure we don't betray the next generation. We can offer hope. And I'm actually inspired by what the young people have done today. And I think it's time this government listened, and indeed governments around the world listened to the young people who are coming together across the world to tell us, do more, do it faster.
But do you buy that, Anna? I mean, you listen to that. It sounds a bit like passing the buck. It wasn't us, it's them now.
I do wonder why you think you did enough when, why didn't you declare a climate emergency? Why didn't you do everything that we've written in our demands? I think everything we're discussing should have been done years before now.
I mean, she's right, you didn't unfreeze fuel duty. Your Lib Dem colleague, Danny Alexander, was in the Treasury at the time. Friends of the Earth said that was a shocking disregard for the nation's health. You launched a number of fracking sites. You lost the fight to get the decarbonisation target into the 2013 Energy Act.
Well, actually, what we did, Liberal Democrats in Europe, we managed to get the climate change targets for the whole of Europe massively increased. And that helped us win the battle at Paris. And I think without the Liberal Democrats in Europe pushing more ambitious targets...
You did do enough?
We did a huge amount. What's really disappointed is that huge base that we managed when actually Britain was leading the world in offshore wind, fantastic record. That's not been taken forward by this government. And what I'd like to see, and why I'm so disappointed about Brexit, is that we need the world to come together. What this protest has been doing is young people around the world coming together, realising that you need international collaboration if you're going to tackle climate change. Liberal Democrats believe in that. That's what we did in government. And unfortunately, with Brexit, this government is preventing that collaboration that the young people are showing is what is needed.
And Rebecca, the way this is being built at the moment, it looks like it is a sort of generational battle. The young pitted against the old. Is it that simple? Is it the young all believe this, the old don't?
I never really think it's a particularly good idea to say the young are one set and they're all the same. I mean, young people are individuals. I'm sure you disagree about some things with some of your friends, and that's a healthy way to be. I think, to my mind, the point here is, I think the consensus is that, obviously there is such a thing as anthropogenic climate change. There are very, very few people who aren't, I mean, that's the truth. Very few people aren't convinced by that. Might be some disagreement about rates and stuff. But there's really a question about priorities and there's a question about solutions. And the way in which we come to make decisions about those things, largely in a kind of nation like ours, is through democratic deliberation. And that's not just about voting, it's about campaigning, it's about informing people. And that's why I'm so impressed that you guys have gone out and have been informing people about this, because it's not just teaching what the truth of the matter is, it's also about showing what you think that priority is. Now, part of the problem about making priorities is that you have a whole load of other issues and some of them are interrelated. So, for instance, I don't know, if you just spent all the budget on one specific climate change demand, then maybe the education budget would have to be cut. And then, of course, education plays in because you need education to fund research. And then research is going to go on and make goods and products which the market is going to drive. And then those costs are going to be driven down. So, I mean, it's all very interrelated. It's very, very difficult to decide what priority a certain policy should take or a certain area should take. But of course, when there is mass uprising about a certain issue within a democracy, then politicians need to listen.
Presumably, as you say, everybody agrees this needs to be sorted. It's just how we sort it. Is the market going to sort it? Is innovation going to sort it? Do we need more policy? I mean, where do you stand on that? What do you want?
I think direct environmental reform needs to be put in place to sort it. I don't think that's being recognised enough. And I think what we've seen is a historical focus on economic policy, which means that throughout history, environmental policy has always been minimised and not taken seriously enough. And that's why we're in the position we are in today. And that's why young people are feeling the need to speak out now.
And Rebecca, do you believe that this can be done through the markets? Do you believe that innovation is going to help, is going to make this change?
So I think there are two things. One is the point about policy and what are the best ways to solve this. And personally, I think some of the policies we've seen put in place by the UK government over the last decade or so, they're sort of tinkering around the edges and they're sometimes quite efficient use of red tape. We've got like the warm homes thing and we've got the levy here. Personally, I think there are some very good sort of single market-based solutions like the cap and trade thing they have in Ontario or having a carbon tax. I would personally prefer to see a solution like that. But I think we also need to remember that for all we can manage to try to drive things here, we've also got to try and convince people abroad as well. Because there are some nations, developing nations, where they may say, well, you guys had an industrial revolution, you were able to use fossil fuels, now we're not. Now, that might be a good argument. The point is, we need to try and convince these people. There might be other people in other countries where they just say, no, we're not listening to you. So it's a point about international...
You mentioned that. I mean, it would be nice to know, as someone from the IEA, whether you're actually funded by those sorts of people.
Well, we can talk about funding. That's a point about privacy. I'm happy to have a full debate with you about privacy and the importance of privacy and the role, indeed, that places like think tanks play within democratic deliberation. But I think that's rather to be leaving the topic here. I think the point is that we have young people. How many of you are out today campaigning?
15,000.
15,000 people campaigning about this issue, and you're bringing out the funding of a single think tank. I think it's going off the topic a little. To be honest, I think it's a little disingenuous and unfair, to be honest.
And Anna, do you agree? Do you? In terms of what you think is going to happen, would you agree? Would you agree with what she said about the developing world is spending, needs to use these sorts of fossil fuels and other?
No, I think I've seen a lot of people try to move the blame onto those countries, And that's a way of not acknowledging our responsibility. I think developed countries have actually a greater responsibility because we're in an economic position where we can implement the environmental reforms that perhaps developing countries can't.
And David, the solution, what is the solution?
Actually, solar power and wind power are things that will help the developing countries, not fossil fuels. It's solar power. You can go into rural Africa and rural India and give them development as well as tackling climate change. And we've got to be more radical. Liberal Democrats actually want to change capitalism. I think banks and the regulation on the city has to be tougher because they are not actually investing in these green technologies in the way they are. We're still seeing far too much capital going to fossil fuels. And if we're going to listen and respond to the protests today, we've actually got to get to the grip of it. We've got to make sure that the pensions regulator, the listings authority, all the regulations on the banks, make sure that these big investors...
Is that possible when all the democratic incentives are short-term?
You know, it is impossible. Listen to the Governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney. He's one of the champions of these sort of reforms that I'm talking about. And if we really get to grips with the way that the big investors make their decisions, by ensuring that climate risk is properly taken into account in those decisions, I think we can really respond in a very radical way
Anna,
to young people today.
are you walking away hopeful from this?
I'm not actually. I'm seeing politicians arguing amongst themselves, and I'm not seeing youth views being considered again. I think they're talking... It's the same policies and the same debates being argued about again and again. When are young people going to be listened to?
Anna Taylor, Ed Davey and Rebecca, thank you so much for joining us.